Welcome back to Mean Streets, the podcast where we investigate the best, worst, and forgotten movies of film noir and more. I am Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth.
And we are your cinematic sleuths. Now it's time to crack another case. Welcome back, Matt.
Hello, Luke. How are you?
Good.
Good.
We should, we should say happy birthday to us.
Happy
Mean
birthday
Streets.
to us.
2 years.
2 years
of this
Has
nonsense.
it flown by?
It has flown by. I'm like, how has it been 2 years of Mean Streets already? Surely we're still
2 years of Mean Streets, and however many episodes it is by now. I've lost
80
count.
some odd
80
episodes.
something. Yeah.
You know, more in
That's
the
a lot of
pipeline.
films.
That is a lot of films. A lot of rambles. Yeah,
a lot of tangents.
A lot of tangents. A lot of rabbit trails. It's been a good time. But
been a good fun.
But we're returning to something today, but looking at it from a very different perspective. We thought this would be fun. So why don't you tee us up with what today's investigation is?
The 1945 pre-release version of The Big Sleep, starring, as we all know, Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, written by William Faulkner, Lee Brackett, and Jules Furthman from Raymond Chandler's novel, and directed by Howard Hawks. And for anyone who doesn't know it, and I can't believe there is one, the plot is private detective Philip Marlowe is hired by a wealthy family. Before the complex case is over, he's seen murder, blackmail, and what might be love.
And we thought, hey, for the birthday episode, for this revisit of The Big Sleep, we would bring in one of our returning cinematic sleuths. Yeah. We have with us Sergio Angelini from Tipping My Fedora. Welcome back, Sergio.
Welcome back, Sergio.
I can't believe you guys asked me back. I'm so pleased. Thank you very much. After all the terrible things I did last time, but let's not talk about it. And congratulations. Hey, 2 years.
Thank you.
I'm super impressed. You guys are very diligent. You work very hard. You deserve lots and lots of celebrating. So I hope you have at least a couple of days off manage with all your various podcasting activities. But yeah, The Big Sleep, you probably need some sleep. But on the other hand, it's this is a great movie to go back to. Wonderful circularity. I don't know what you're going to do for the 3rd anniversary. Could it be the Michael Winner version?
Oh dear.
There'd have to be a fair few birthday drinks before we could approach that one, I think, Sergio.
Yes. Now, before we dive into this, we have decided to affectionately call this version of The Big Sleep the Vickers cut.
Yes.
Now, if you heard our first episode on this podcast, which was on this film, we went into about as much detail as you could possibly go into the making of the film, the writing of the film, a whole bunch of stuff. So we're not going to recover all of that sort of stuff. But what we do want to look at this time around is maybe a little bit of the production stuff, but really what in the way that it pertains to why there was a 1945 version that was briefly released for certain individuals, and then why there was a 1946 version, and the differences between the two, and whether one is better than the other or not.
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
That is the big question of The Big Sleep, 1945. So I guess we can sort of dive right in and talk about, how this thing sort of got made. Well, we, like I said, go back and listen to the beginning of our first episode to get those details. But essentially, this film was made in 1944, between 1944 and 1945. And once it was all wrapped up and done, it was put on hold. And it was put on hold because World War II was coming to an end. And Warner Brothers were like, shit, we have a bunch of crap war movies that we need to get out. And they didn't think the PI movie would, it would age better. So it would be fine if they put it on hold for a couple of years and, get through their back catalog and then release the film. Now, this led to some behind the scenes shenanigans, right?
Some issues.
some issues. But before we dive into that, let's just find out, Sergio, when have you always been aware of the 1945 cut? Have you do you have one that you favor more than the other?
Well, I think I became aware of it. It might be in the late 1980s. Strictly speaking, I think it was in 1988 when I think information crept out that the 1945 cut, shall we call it, which had been released overseas to servicemen only. So it was to a restricted public. But it turned out a copy of it existed in the vaults. But it didn't actually make its appearance anywhere until well into the 1990s after they'd done a fair amount of restoration. I was at the National Film Theatre as the main screen at the BFI South Bank then used to be called, when they, for the first time, screened it for a British audience. So I was there, and it was introduced by Robert Gitt, who runs the UCLA archive, and who I had actually spoken to a couple of times. I did a master's in film archiving, and in that I sort of got in touch with him on a couple of projects. He will not remember my name, but it's I'm name dropping, and so I got to see it then, and I also got to see in essence, that little documentary that you now get as an extra. It was first on the DVD and is now on the Blu-ray, in which he talks about the different variations. So that was great because big Chandler fan, have been since the early 80s. And so this was a great opportunity, particularly because of the way that the film departs from the book. So it was very interesting to look at this different version of the film, which I don't know if it departs less, but it departs, well, in a Vickers way, it departs definitely less, which is significant, which is why it's great to call it the Vickers cut. But in other respects, it just differs in different ways and departs in different directions, as it were. But when I saw it, I was utterly fascinated by it, because obviously it's very rare to be able to see completely finished different versions of a film. There are a few, and they're always fascinating. And this isn't something like, say, Payback, the Mel Gibson film, which I'm a big fan of, but which was a case where they changed their minds and they radically shifted so that the third act is completely different and has completely different cast in some respects and a completely different ending. Here, it's about that iterative process of shaping something to make it work better for a bigger audience and for other reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into. So that was really fascinating. In terms of which I think is better, it's an odd thing. I think what I would say is that I believe the pre-release Vickers cut is more noir, whereas the standard release version is less noir and more screwball, which is a sort of tendency within Hawks's work, certainly from this point onwards, where you tend to get this kind of loose, slightly ramshackle, sort of almost comedic sensibility that underlies a lot of his films, and it becomes very obvious from this point onwards, but it was always sort of there, really. And I think, therefore, it's not about which one I prefer. It's kind of, well, what are you more in the mood for? I think they both work equally well. There's obviously, we'll get into it. There are some things that are not so good in both versions. And I think that probably the reality of it is, of course, is that this pre-release version probably needed some tweaking anyway, irrespective of the tweaks that they'd done, certainly some pruning. And I think that, therefore, my feeling about which is better, would partly depend on if they'd done a bit of that, which might have happened if they hadn't instead, for the reasons you were just saying, which is that they were going to delay releasing it by about a year anyway, because it's not a film with any wartime references. Quite the opposite, in fact. He's driving around far too much if you consider what the petrol restrictions would have been at the time. He literally wouldn't have been able to do it. you know.
Yeah.
I mean, way to get totally anal about really stupid stuff. But
Yes.
it sort of, it doesn't feel like a war film at all.
No.
There are no references to it at all.
Well, maybe the only big reference is the woman cab driver.
Well, I'm hoping we get into that, because that's part of what is the style of the film, and it's partly the screwbally element, but which I also think remind me a bit of kind of the James Bond type thing. And there is a sort of weird James Bond sort of connection here, and we'll get to it later on. But so I want to talk about that, but I'll save it for now. But absolutely, but I think that therefore it made sense. And because they were going to do that, if they had just said, right, okay, and then we'll do a little bit of work on it, and it would have been a stronger noir film, I think it probably to a large extent would have worked. All the important stuff is there, I think.
Yeah.
But absolutely, I think the stuff they put in there is part of the big crowd-pleasing parts of the story. And therefore, I think that probably its continued success might be more down to the work they did afterwards. So so I like them both. There you are. I'm not exactly sitting on the fence, but I'm an all rounder. I want more, not less.
So, well, I guess it's interesting because this film exists in two versions, mainly because of Bacall's agent. So, for those who don't know, Bogart and Bacall had their big hit together, To Have and Have Not. And then she went on to do The Big Sleep, and then went on to do Confidential Agent. Confidential Agent came out before The Big Sleep, and the critics panned her. They were like, what is this shit? This girl can't act. And then her agent was nervous about all of this, went to Jack Warner at Warner Brothers and was like, bro, dude, I'm telling you, reshoot them some stuff. I've told you this already, but please you will have a better film for it, because she's really good. But if you release the film as is, people will think that she's not good, and it will ruin her career. So in an attempt, really, and from the way I read it, is this version, the main version that we have is really this last ditch attempt to salvage Lauren Bacall's career, to save her from being critically panned. I don't know if the Vickers cut would have been some sort of final nail in her acting career. I don't think she's anywhere near that bad in this, but they certainly go a long way to boost her role to such an extent that it does edge out Vickers quite a bit, and the character of Carmen, in my opinion. And I had issues with it when we talked about it the first time around, and so it's fun to now focus on this entirely here. But it's fascinating that of the 12 reels that made up this film, they made changes to 7 of them. So there's a lot of changes happening to this movie, all to, if it's really going to happen or not, but in an attempt to salvage a career that may or may not actually have been, been eviscerated by her performance. But let's talk about that for just a second. Do we think Bacall's performance in the pre-release version, is it so bad that would have ruined her career?
I don't think it is. I think there's an obvious difference between the two performances, and I think someone's had a word with her and said there's a confidence to the 46 performance that isn't always there in the 45 for me. But I think somebody may have had a word, behind the scenes with her, because she is a bit stiff in some and a bit stilted in some scenes, Bacall. And but I mean, we mustn't forget, I should say, that how inexperienced she was at this time. But I just want to pick up on something Sergio said about it being a screwball, the 46 version being a screwball. I sort of agree with that, but I would add that it's always seemed to me that rather than being a Chandler Marlowe vehicle, this is a Bogart Bacall vehicle, and that they are more important than anything else. And I think that's always been to its detriment for me. because I
Likewise.
would have preferred a Chandler Marlowe vehicle and them to be more prominent than they are. And I think that leans into the idea of this sort of romantic two-header, But no, I don't think it would have ruined her career. I think she might have got a few notices saying she'd improved, but not by much, and she needs to do more going forward. I think that may have been the sort of overall extent of it. But she does improve in the 46. But it is I agree with you, Luke. It is at the cost of Carmen and at the cost of Vickers. Which, again, if you're being a Chandler, if you want this to be a Chandler adaptation, that's a pretty big sort of sacrifice to be made.
It's at before I hand over to you, Sergio, it's at the cost of Vickers, but it's also at the cost of Marlowe's good friend Bernie. Like he is also there's a few scenes with him, and then there's a big chunk of him that is cut entirely from the film in a scene that we'll talk about a little bit later that I think 100% should have remained in the film. Maybe not the amount of time, but a big chunk of that I think should have stayed in the film itself. Sergio, on the acting side, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think Matthew's definitely got a point there. I think partly it's if we're looking behind the scenes, I think we're told that during the filming, this was when Bogart and Bacall were having their affair, and he was deciding whether he was going to go through a divorce, and therefore things were stressful, if not strained. I think stressful. By the time they came back to do the reshoots in January of the following year, so literally 12 months later, they were very happily married, and I think that everything was on a much more even keel. In fact, they were probably incredibly sort of positive, and I think also knew each other better as a couple and also as actors to some extent. I think one should probably take a step back in terms of assessing her work, just in terms of Confidential Agent. I don't know if you guys have read the book. I'm a big fan of the book, and the film is a slightly odd choice because it's made by a lot of on the technical side, it's made by a lot of the best people at the studio, but it's made by a director who was known almost exclusively as a theater director. And he was not an obvious choice to make a film like this, and it's a slightly difficult book. It's about really the Spanish Civil War. It originally came out in 1939. It's one of Green's entertainments, in inverted commas. She is horribly miscast. She's supposed to be a British aristocrat. It's terrible casting. It's terrible casting. It's obviously designed to be a massive contrast to her previous role. From that point of view, absolutely good idea. See what kind of range she's got. Well, it turned out that they had gone right past her range and, gone around the earth and come back again. And basically, she was left dizzy from it. And so it's just not an easy film to watch. It's quite heavy, quite heavy-handed. I think it's actually very interesting. The star of the film is actually Charles Boyer, who's once again a lot older than her, but he is also looks a lot older than Bogart did. And I think that she doesn't give a particularly bad performance, but she's so horribly miscast that she just doesn't have much of an opportunity to make a good impression. In The Big Sleep, she was always going to be fine. It's a good role for her. It's modeled very closely on To Have and Have Not, which, as we know, has got bugger all to do with the book. It's just a very, it's very much that kind of standard Howard Hawks, guy meets girl, girl meets guy kind of thing. It's all about friendship and about sort of all those pally behavior that people have. It's very conversational. It's all witty one-liners. It's all about the banter and the sexual tension. There's plenty of that in here in the 45 version. It was always going to be there. There are some things that have just been made better. I think one of them is the famous wardrobe malfunction, which is simply the hat with the veil that she wears, which, doesn't look great. So they redo the scene. They take the opportunity to expand her role and to make it more in line with what had worked so successfully into Have and Have Not. And I think her agent, and her agent was the super agent of his day, Charles K. Feldman. And I love the idea, Luke, that he goes to Jack L. Warner and says, bro. I think that's great. I mean, I wish I could have been at that meeting. But on the other hand, you know what? They were probably fairly rude to each other in that kind of, that way that movies don't show. They were probably calling each other all kinds of names. And but I think that you have the opportunity to see giving her more to do, giving her a bit more space. I also, not that I want to bring this up just yet, because while it unbalances the narratives, we wouldn't want to give your myriad listeners the impression that scenes with Vickers have been cut and given over to Bacall. They have not. No. Vickers Vickers, in fact, has more scenes in the 46 one than she had in the 45 one.
Like one more scene.
But it's a great one. And, but the point is, she's actually getting more out of it than she had before. On the other hand, of course, the balance of the narrative have shifted away from it being her story. But of course, and I don't know when you want to get into that, but a lot of that has to do with the way that they are beating the hell out of the book to make their movie, because she's very important in the book in a way that she cannot be, given what they've decided to do in the film, no matter what. You have this weird thing. She's an important character. She has these fascinating subterranean tensions. There's all the subtext. There's all this sexual tension. There's all this madness. And they're never, ever going to discuss it and explore it because they're not going to go where the book wants to go. And so they are. And I mean, you guys discussed it, but the way that they adapted it was right. I'll do the even chapters, you do the odd chapters between Brackett and Faulkner. So they were just going on and we're just going to do the book. Then send it over to Hawks, and he'll work with his regular, rewrite guy Charles Furthman, and they'll figure it out between them. But we'll give them a proper, screenplay version to work from. Which is one way to make a cake. I think it takes longer that way, but okay, you probably could still get a very nice cake out of it. But it's one of these peculiarities where, if the movie feels different, and it's kind of great. You're watching it, you're thinking, oh, she's great in this and she's perfect in this. And I want to see the version of it that goes where it's supposed to go. The other thing, and I don't know if you guys want to get into it or not, of course, before we talk about anything else, also is that aspect of the short story that it's based on, which is just very interesting, so we could get into that. And how that tells you it wants to go in a certain direction as well. And of course, the other thing about the scene that's reinserted is it tells us all about the chauffeur, but anyway, I think she would have been just great. I think the film would have made pots of money, but what it did do was bolster her popularity, because I think it just emphasized it more. So I think she's more the star, because again, she's one of these, not to be mean, because she's a big name, but ask anyone to say, oh, give me that film with Lauren Bacall where she's the big star. It's not easy. The big star is Humphrey Bogart. She isn't. He's the big star in all 4 of the films that they make together. She's not the big star in Young Man with a Horn, which if you haven't seen it, you really should. Directed by Michael Curtiz, who she hated. And with Kirk Douglas, another one of Charles Feldman's clients. He's fantastic. She's great. Doris Day's even in it. Technically, she's come in 3rd after those 2. If you try to come up with the film which defines her as the big star, there kind of isn't one.
Well, it's blatantly Harper.
Yeah. She's in exactly 3 scenes. She's great in all of them. But exactly. I mean, you could argue that she is the rock of Murder on the Orient Express, when you.
I was just going to mention that film.
Yeah, no, she's great. But you know what I'm getting at, and there are a number of big names from that era in particular, where it's very, very hard to think of a film where they are the absolute central core star of that film. Tells you a lot about filmmaking at the time. There are plenty of films, big female stars, but if Barbara Stanwyck had been doing it, she'd been playing Marlowe. How great would that have been? I'm all for that version of the film, but I mean, it's just so in a way, the kind of success that she was having, and she was a top billed star for a good decade and a bit after this. And then it's, I mean, she started very young, but eventually, the usual Hollywood ageism kicks in, doesn't it? And so she's basically in her 30s, barely in her, barely 40, but I think by the time
she's 35, if anyone gets that reference. Kiss, bang, bang. Come on.
Yeah. But I mean, literally, she's 41 maybe by the time she does Marlowe, and she's playing the wife who's in a wheelchair, and she's supposed to be, I don't know how old. Basically, she's playing General Stonewood in that one. General Stonewood was about 80 in that. For God's sake, she's marvelous. She's sensational. She looks incredible. She's, she can wipe the floor with all of them. But that's a whole different story. So anyway, so I think she's great. I think she's great. She is better in the reshoots, I think. But again, they're allowing for it. They're giving her more to do. They're giving her better lines. They're giving her better camera angles as well. They're treating her as the bigger star or a bigger star than she already was as the co-star. Because of course, in the film, he's surrounded by a whole bunch of amazing actresses in that film. Which is kind of great.
Yeah, he is, and I agree that they're giving her better camera angles, particularly in the sort of closing scenes in the house with Canino. When you compare those two scenes, she's got much better. Yeah. The camera's much kinder to her in the 46 than it is in the 45. In the 45, she's just there. In the 46, she's there. And I think there's a crucial difference between the two there.
Well, she's given a couple of really great new entrances. It's that thing. It's when you enter the scene. Instead, like you say, instead of just you're in the scene, you're just sitting there or standing there. No, you come through a door. The camera is, looking at you, and it's the star system. You are godlike.
Yeah. No, it's very true. Like I said, I overall I think her performance is fine in the 45 version. I agree with everyone that the changes do benefit her in all the right ways. For sure. There's a number of, as you said, Matt, some wooden moments. I'm always just a little bit disappointed that I just feel like it comes at a cost. And honestly, I would still probably, I feel like there's a version of the two that you can now amalgamate and make the perfect version, where you can cut a little bit of nonsense away, keep the added scene of Martha from the 46 version that I guess they say was probably filmed for the 44. At least that's what I've heard. It was probably filmed for that bit, but then just not included in the or filmed during when they were doing the filming in 44 to 45, and then just not put in the 45 cut. But there's probably a better amalgamation there. But this was definitely an attempt to make her shine, and I think the film definitely succeeds on that level, and it succeeds on as we said earlier, like a Bogart Bacall double bill. Like it exceeds on that, which is really all it's set out to do, because plot be damned, everyone's having a good time, right?
Yes, well, yeah, absolutely.
Right. Should we talk about some of the changes or some of the differences? Highlight some of them. The first big change, and then we can kind of you guys can jump in with ones that you are familiar with or like the most or whatnot. But one of the first big differences is that scene in Geiger's house where Marlowe finds Carmen drugged up, and she's clearly had her inappropriate photos have been taken of her. And instead of just sort of instantly cutting to him messing with Geiger's desk, there's what I think is a quite fun scene of him doing some investigating, of him trolling through the house, and there's the broken window and there's the door and all, he's got the cups and all that kind of stuff, and he finds the keys to the desk, and then he gets into the desk, and I on one level I can kind of see why they cut it, but at the same time it was like this was a really good scene that showed him being savvy and cool, and I don't know why that was cut down to like almost entirely out.
Nor do I. It's nice to see detectives detecting.
Yes.
It's very often detective movies don't have enough of it, and
yes,
I really enjoyed that. Well, watching it for this, I really enjoyed it happening, even though it's a very brief period of time that it takes up. I was grateful for it because I think it's a vast improvement on it sort of dissolves into him finding the keys, doesn't it? From putting her finding the camera in the statue, and then it dissolves into him at the desk. And I just like seeing the interconnecting bit of sleuthing, because it's what Marlowe does. Why wouldn't we see it?
Do I need to see Marlowe doing the washing up? I don't know. It's that weird bit when he puts all the bottles and the glasses in the sink and turns it on, and then he sees that, the windows have been broken in and so on. So, it's there for a reason, but at the same time, it's interesting quotidian detail, but on the other hand, it is literally very mundane. And you're sort of thinking, and yes, you get to see how he finds the keys, therefore he knows how to open the lockbox. Otherwise, he'd have broken into it or just picked up the lockbox and taken it off with him, right? And what's odd to me is that even for the time, I think that was a surprisingly literal bit of filming, if you will. It was unusual for a very, substantial studio film with absolutely A stars and a big budget, to make that kind of film. To get to be that granular, shall we say? I agree with you. You don't. There's a reason you don't usually see it, frankly. And the film is perhaps just a teensy bit too long. So it's always the kind of stuff that is probably going to go. I think what it allows you to do is it is a question of tempo, and I think that's interesting because what it does is. And this is where maybe the 45 preview version has certain advantages over the 46 version, is that it allows a kind of more up and then down and then up and then down feel. It allows you to, crest a little bit and then slow down a little bit and then get up again. Whereas otherwise, you get these kind of dissolves or quick wipes and you're suddenly into the next big important character scene, and you almost don't have time to enjoy it. And that's always a shame. So I agree with you. It's fun to see Marlowe be a private eye because he gets pushed around a lot. On the other hand, because he's going to have to go back to that location again, you could argue I don't want him to spend too much time there because it just gets a bit repetitive. But I take the point. But I was always surprised that it was quite as long or not a bit more succinct, that there wasn't a way that, like I say, it isn't horribly wrong, but in terms of pacing, it is surprisingly relaxed. You got a dead body, you got somebody who's out for the count, who knows who's coming, but like I say, he slows down, does the washing up, has a nice look around, finds some keys, quite leisurely. What they're not doing, and this is partly because it's Hawks, if it had been Michael Curtiz directing it, it all would have been shot much more dynamically. So you would have had, so that alone gives it its own sense of urgency. Yeah. And it does weirdly lack urgency considering you've got a dead body in the room. Yeah. And so that I find odd. But it's very Hawks-like because he tended to shoot that way. And there's just that big difference between how somebody like Curtiz would have visualized it. There's no way Mildred Pierce will work that way. Let's put it that way, which is shot basically at the same time. But this isn't a big criticism because I think you're both absolutely correct. But I've always found it surprising. When I saw the longer version, I thought, well, if you were going to shorten the film, and it is, we should say the 46 release version is in fact about what, 3 minutes shorter. I think
so. Yeah.
Despite all the additions, they've taken what 15 and some minutes out, and it's an obvious thing to cut in terms of the kind of stuff you tend to get in movies. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with it, because particularly if you're not seeing it for the first time, I think when you're at home and you're just sitting there, you're enjoying it. I mean, I would want a 3-hour version of that where you get to see him doing absolutely everything. I want to see, I want to see him having 3 more drinks with General Sternwood. I mean, partly because, of course, in the book you get an important scene between them at the end, and here you definitely don't get it.
Yes.
In fact, we could talk about. I mean, the ending. I don't think it has a very satisfactory ending in either version.
No.
That's a different conversation. But so absolutely, I think from a home viewing point of view on my nice big plasma telly, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was marvelous.
Yeah, because it's unfortunate. I think because the whole, it seems the whole reason that is cut is again to give Bacall something to do. At the expense of a very terrible voiceover dub, scene that happens afterwards. Because I do quite like him walking through the house, finding the stuff, doing the washing up. I don't mind it. And then I like the bit where he puts her in the car, and I even like the scene in the car. I like seeing Vickers' reflection in the rearview mirror. I thought that was a cool reflection. And I like the scene between Marlowe and the butler. And I like the fact that no one else is involved. Like I like that Sternwood wasn't there. I like that Vivian wasn't there. I enjoyed that more than when we swapped to the other version where it's just like, okay, we're just back to Bogart Bacall banter while they're just lugging Carmen around. I guess we got Carmen in another scene, but she's she's passed out. She's just being lugged around.
Yeah, and this
like
is
dirty laundry.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that, Luke. And this is an example of what I mean by Bogart Bacall vehicle. This just smacks of another excuse to get them together. For giggles and for that chemistry, when really Marlowe's got a job to do, and part of the job is getting Carmen out of Geiger's house and protecting her, and then going back to Geiger's house to investigate further. But instead we have to have this, however long it is, scene of sexual frisson, and I preferred this version. He's outside and it's pouring down in rain. It was much more noir to me, and I prefer this version of the delivery of Carmen back home.
Yes, because weirdly enough, in the Bacall version, he sort of has to repeat himself about 3 different times. Like everything that he says very quickly to the butler in the first version is all just quickly and done. But he has to say it all. He first has to talk to the butler for a second and say some bits again. Then he has to say it all to Bacall again. And then he has to come back and say it all again to the butler. And I'm like, well, the other version was, even though we had to watch him walk around and it wasn't as Serge said, maybe not as dynamic, we've actually now had to sit here and watch him just repeat himself a couple of times when the first one was actually more interesting and more succinct.
Yeah, well, I agree with that.
When I was watching it, I agree with you, by the way. I mean, like I say, I like the more noir version, absolutely. And I thought they really should have retained that shot in the car when he's driving her. Part of that is it's just very well done, but also because it gives it just it's a transitional device. It would have worked. Gives it a bit of visual variety, because otherwise it goes from one inside one room to another inside another one room, and then another one, and then another one. And the film tends to operate on that level. Of course, the other thing, and it's a structural principle that the film is having, if you think about it, trouble with at this point because of the reshoots, but which is why I think they did it the way they did in the first place, which is that, of course, they're having to be equivocal about her. She might be the baddie because she isn't the straightforward romantic foil, even in the screwball sense of, they kind of trip each other up, they're bad to each other, but because they're going to end up together at the end, it all is okay. Here, because it's a murder mystery and fundamentally a serious one, if it turns out that she's really caught up in the whole thing, this could end just like the Maltese Falcon. He could be sending her down at the end. Now, we know now, I mean, that's not going to happen. But in terms of how you're presenting the story, particularly in the pre-release version, in the Vickers cut, excuse me, you have that problem of squaring that structural and kind of narrative imbalance in how you want to present her character. One makes more sense, but because it's more beholden to the book. The second one makes less sense, but and obviously we're going to be discussing this quite since you guys have touched on it already, but it's this whole business about why the plot matters so much less in the screwball version compared with the noir version, which of course is only right if that's the film you're making. And that's perhaps what that re-emphasizing of her role fundamentally does. It shifts everything, throws it her way. And therefore, if we consider Vickers as a noir character, and we consider Bacall as the romantic, screwball isn't quite right, but nonetheless, you get my meaning. Then I think in shifting that weight, then it has a domino effect. And so I agree with you, but it's interesting because as we watch it now, except maybe the first scene, you have to start to wonder, is this going to be one of those films where the charming leading lady turns out to be a femme fatale?
Yeah.
And I don't know, for a big chunk of the movie, and clearly when she turns up at the garage place towards the end of the film, well, clearly your first instinct is to say, oh, hell, she's in on it. This is going to be really bad. She's going to have to go to jail. I'm going to hate this, and they're doing everything they can to reassure you that that's not going to happen, and yet don't want to give up on, like, Matt was saying, the basic frisson of that, the spiciness of that possibility. But it's just not that hard a movie, is it? It just isn't.
Sadly, no. Which was also my problems when we did it the first time, the 1946 version. That is, the book ends in such a sour way, and I'm never satisfied when.
I don't agree. I don't think it's sour at all. I think it's deeply romantic. Really? Oh, come on.
It's 100% a sour ending. Like, it might be romantic, but it's a sour ending. I mean, he's a part of the nastiness now. He is not ending that book as a virtuous hero. He is no better than the worst of them. And removing that from the film, I thought was detrimental to the film, kind of insulting to the story, and just reeked of Hollywood. Must be Hollywood happy ending.
Yeah, and he's done it to protect the general in the book at its basis level. He's done it because he says, doesn't he, the general didn't have to be part of it.
Yeah. Because so Marlowe is a man in search of a dad figure. And that's what he saw in the general, which was also eradicated from this film, which I thought was.
It makes sense. He's not a cop, and there's a reason he's not a cop, and we know that there's a reason he's not a cop. There's a reason he doesn't work for the DA's office and got kicked out for insubordination, right? He's still friends with Bernie Oles, and we'll get to talk about that a bit more in a minute. But that's why I think it's absolutely the right ending, because, well, as I say, if we want to get into the short story,
sure,
makes even more sense in the short story, of course.
Yeah. Well, do you want to talk about the short story now, or should we talk about the 10-minute scene that they cut? Which one do you want to do first?
Oh, shall we do the short story first? Yeah, get it out of the way. So the book is primarily derived, although I think quite loosely actually, from two short stories. So one is Killer in the Rain, which is the kind of Eddie Mars and the kind of blackmail part of the plot, and The Curtain, which is one of Chandler's absolute best short stories, I think. And that's the one that deals with the general and the daughter and another gangster. In the show, not wanting to necessarily spoil things for people, but I just about to. But here's a warning that this is the part of the plot that that is semi-used in The Big Sleep from the curtain is who the killer is, and in the short story, it turns out to be you basically the general has asked. It's Carmody, isn't it, in the short story? And he has been asked to find the equivalent of Rusty Regan in the book. So he's actually expressly asked him for it. Whereas I've always loved how The Big Sleep, the novel, is so much more crafty about the fact that they all think he's looking for Rusty Regan and he isn't. But of course it's only important in the book if you follow the book. The way they change it in the film, it doesn't matter. But in that one, he's looking for him and comes to the conclusion that he's been knocked off. And it turns out that, you know, Rusty Regan's married to the general's daughter and they have a son. And the son, it turns out, is very seriously unwell, and it turns out he's killed him, and the whole blackmail plot has to do with what they had to do to dispose of the body and protect the little boy. And that little boy tries to kill the detective too, and so the detective says to her, he's a young lad, you might actually be able to, which is what he says in the novel as well, and basically you might be able to actually make them well, you might be able to get them help, real help that they're not going to get in prison, or whatever it would have been. So I'm going to let you deal with it. But I now know, you know that I know you are going to have to do something about it, because otherwise I am going to go to the police, in essence, you know, which is why I think it's not as sour as Luke reckons it is. But anyway, so in the short story, obviously that's an even stronger element because it's a young child. I mean, I think they're supposed to be 11, maybe something like that. Obviously much older person. But you know, now in the book, it's still the equivalent character, although it's from the other short story. But you know, it's done for different reasons, and it's handled nonetheless in a fairly similar way. But has, I think, you know, it kind of follows that through line. Yeah. I think that works. I mean, I think it's a terrific short story. You know, a teensy-weensy bit of it even got used in The Long Goodbye. You know, I think Chandler knew it was a good one. But it is very interesting, particularly if you compare it with Killer in the Rain, you know, which feels just as tough, but thinner and a bit more raw by comparison. And I think it is fascinating to reread them, because he was always against republishing them because of the fact that he, you know, inverted commas, cannibalized them. But I think that they're actually adapted to an extraordinary extent. There are only very small bits that are really similar. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just general ideas and basic characters, but all the names are changed and motivations are different. The style of writing could be different. And most of the famous stuff from the novel kind of isn't from either of them, you know, which is kind of great, you know. Yeah. And so I just think that that's really interesting. And so, you know, so I think it's worth knowing that, because I think it drives certain decisions that are being made in the novel, and which then are being rejected primarily, I suppose, for censorship reasons, and also for reasons of just sort of commodification in terms of making it work in a more traditional fashion as a narrative, you know, goodies and baddies, and not really having people be somewhere in between.
Yes.
Which is sort of hard for Hollywood to handle at that time, maybe, you know.
Yes. Oh my God, yes.
You know, I mean, what would you know, wouldn't it be marvelous to imagine that the production code had never happened,
right?
And that films like this could have had all the swearing and all the things, hopefully without exploitation, and you could have had serious films made with these incredible actors and amazing directors and fantastic screenwriters. But there you go. Anyway, just thought I'd get that in there. I don't know how you feel about the short stories, particularly, but the Curtain in particular, I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, no, I have nothing bad to say about either of them, and I think your your summary and the way in which they're used, I think sort of says it all. I don't really have a I don't have any sort of problem with them, and I actually find it I find it from a writing perspective, from an author, I find it very interesting to see how he took these two ideas and smashed them together to do something new with them. That to me, I find that sort of method really interesting because I think we've all maybe sort of been there, like, you know what, I had this idea over here that was really good. I'm going to take it, but then rework it, and it's ends up not being the same idea, but it's just sort of rooted in this idea, and then it becomes its own original thing, and is I like that stuff. I think
happens all the time to me.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, that idea is a really good one, but I could never make it work. And the reason is you've got it in the wrong format, or the wrong setting, or it's the wrong body, or whatever it might be. And the minute you have that breakthrough moment, you can use it because you do something else with it. I think, but the way Chandler writes, I mean, cannibalizing is the word, Sergio, as you said. I think it's a fascinating approach to writing a novel. And there's a real skill in the way that he sews them together, so that in such a way that you can enjoy The Big Sleep as a novel, but you can equally enjoy those two short stories as two separate short stories. I mean, that is no mean feat. That takes a great writers to do, So I've like Luke, I find it a fascinating way of working.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's move on to the big 10-minute scene that is cut from the movie. That is, I guess, one of the major changes to the film. Now, Marlowe is taken to the DA's office. They've arrested the young fella who has shot Brody, and they were all being taken to downtown. And I love this scene. And I wish it was in the film. I maybe could be trimmed down a little bit, but as you said, Sergio, it's a scene that has a transition. We're in the house, then we're in the car, then we're in the office. There's a bunch of people talking in the office, and everyone leaves the office, and there's a set change, and then it's just Marlowe and the DA. And then after that, we then have another scene with Bernie outside. So you actually have a good variety of locations. I don't feel that this scene is stagnant. I don't feel that it is slowing things down. I think it is a really good moment in the film to try and clear some shit up.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's being excised from the 46 version is a little bit sort of it sort of makes you go, what okay. I mean, it's all there. You can kind of work out what's going on in the 46 version regardless. Marlowe sort of spouts off some of these details, if I remember right, with Bernie in the reshoot scene that they do with him and Bernie in Bernie's office.
He does. It's not quite as explicit as it is in the.
Yeah, he does like a Spitfire version of it, but I actually liked the. And again, maybe it's because I feel like everything is breathing a bit more and feeling just a little bit, in certain cases, a bit more natural. And I guess that's the contention, is the scenes with Bacall aren't all as natural. Now the ones in the 46 feel a bit more natural, but at the expense of cutting other scenes that had some breathiness to them. But what's your take on this scene, guys? Should it have stayed? Am I wrong?
No, I don't think you are wrong, if I can jump in first. I think this is a perfect point in the film where so much has been happening to have this sort of come down time to sort of summarize what's been going on and where Marlowe's mind is at. Just to give us time to say, oh, right, okay. Because there's been a lot happening up until this point. And one of the things I like that about the scene where the lift with Bernie, it's Bernie and Marlowe, is there's a specific reference to Regan running off with Mrs. Mars, which then is setting up
the
third act.
Yeah.
So that third act doesn't seem, as it sort of does in the 46 for me, to come out of nowhere.
Yes.
You know, there's a nice bit of foreshadowing there and setting up. And I think the film needs a little bit of just sort of downtime to all get our heads together and find out where we are and what we've found out. And I don't think it's done necessarily in a sort of clunky exposition way. I suppose a real harsh critic would say it can be looked like that, but I think it's carried off so well, and I love the interaction between Marlowe and Bernie Olds. I'm glad there's more of it than in the 46 version. So yeah, I agree. I think this is a good scene, and I'm sorry it was cut. Yeah, it could be trimmed. I'm not going to say it couldn't, but I think for what it is and what we get out of it, and all the scenes that follow, I think it's worth having. Plus, it shows a little bit of Marlowe's backstory when he was at the DA's office.
Yeah,
the conversation with the
captain
DA
hates him,
shows,
but the DA sort of likes him a little bit.
Sort of likes him a little bit, and maybe you can go off on all sorts of flights of fancy, but we're sorry to have to fire him. So I think there's a little bit of all that going on in these few scenes and in these 10 minutes that I think are an improvement. He does do it in the 46 version. There is a little bit of it with Olds, but I don't think it's quite as clear as this. Although this doesn't it doesn't spoon feed you, but it does help to sort of get you back on track with where the plot is going. So I agree. I'm sorry this was cut out.
It's one of those sequences that I think is very familiar, particularly if you're a fan of, traditional detective fiction. You tend to have a sort of summary scene of some kind, usually more or less at around this point, kind of 50, 60% into the film. Usually you have to do a recap because usually things have gotten a bit complicated. You can't quite remember who everybody's called. And even if you've got in old-fashioned books, you've got a list of the cast of characters at the front, and so it's actually helpful for you to regroup in your mind. So it serves a purpose. I think it does it perfectly well. I think what is mostly good about it, as you say, the reason it's a memorable scene is because of the way that Bernie Olds, particularly at the beginning of the scene, speaks for Marlowe. But he also, it's important because partly he's sort of saying, he's having a go at the other cop, of course. It says, in your jurisdiction, all these sorts of things, and pointing out all the good things that Marlowe's just done for him. And that's important because from a logic standpoint, it's also, you get to understand why Marlowe kind of manages to not get into too much trouble, because otherwise, knowing what hardboiled fiction is like, but also reality was like, he probably wouldn't have gone quite as far as he does. So it helps soften it. You're thinking, okay, they're being nice to him because he's helped them out. Yeah. So it serves a logic in terms of character. I also think that it's just really nice to have that friendship between him and Olds developed. So I think between that and the way it goes off at the end, at the end of that scene when they go off and they go get a drink, I think that's all really important because actually there's not a lot of that in there. And I think it's important. On the other hand, and I'm going to do the other on the hand bit, it is too long. And I think that it's one of those scenes that they could have probably cut it in half and maybe they should have reshot it rather than trying to edit around it. If they'd done it as part of the reshooting. Also, I think, and this is going to sound a bit 21st century, one of the things that I like about the film is that there are a lot of moments in the film where predominantly, in fact, in the film, is where you tend to not have something that was very typical of films of this type, which is that it's a whole bunch of guys in a room. Usually there are women there too. And this is a very, very long scene where that is absolutely not true. It's an entire reel, which is 10 and a half minutes, in which is just a bunch of guys talking to each other. And, from that point of view, it stands out because it really doesn't happen in the rest of the film to anything like that degree. And obviously it means the dynamic's different and it feels different. Also, it is partly recapping the plot for people in the cheap seats. And I think it does it very nicely, but it is an exposition scene, or as we like to call it, a Basil scene, because we're all fans of Austin Powers. Or Michael York anyway. And it seems to me that they should have made that again a bit like the washing up scene, as I'm now going to call it. It seems to me that to have it be quite so long is very, very odd, given the type of film that it is, because it does bring the whole film to an absolute standstill. You're more or less not quite in the middle of the film. We're just over the halfway mark, but all of a sudden we just stop dead, and all of a sudden it's like in the Maltese Falcon, where you've just got these hugely long dialogue scenes. Now, the Maltese Falcon is, I think, a very special kind of movie, and the fact that the last half hour of the film is just in one room in that film is extraordinary, but there's a reason it's extraordinary. There's a reason you wouldn't really want to do that unless it's a monogram quickie and they just don't have another set, because they can't afford it. Here it's not that. It's because they can't come up with a swifter way of conveying the information. It's done on a character basis, and all the beats work, and all the Bernie old stuff in particular is important. And the fact that he's having to go at another cop, and it partly helps Marlowe out, is important. So I think I want it there. I think it's too long. I do think it's too long. I think they could have reshot it and made it a bit shorter. But yeah, it's one of those things that, of course, when that scene goes, a number of actors in the film suddenly vanished. It's just not in the film at all. And that, that's tough. You go tell the wife and kids, sorry about that.
Right.
I don't. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they do just disappear. And I don't disagree that it can be shorter, and it probably would have made sense to reshoot it while they were at it, sort of thing. But I think in principle and on a fundamental basis, I think it is a scene that needs to be in there in some form. For the reasons that we've said, it is recapping the plot and sort of restarting the film for the third act. But you can't have your cake and eat it. And some people say the 46 is just too confusing to understand, and they just give up halfway, 30 minutes in, and then just go along for the ride. This at least makes an effort to put you back on track. So I think it needs to be in there. Whether or not cut, but
it's the crucial scene that makes a difference between the two versions. I think no question. I think that's what defines the film that you're watching. And if you decide the plot doesn't matter and that it's about character, it's about the sexy banter, it's about just enjoying being in their presence and the atmosphere and all these things which are important. And if that's the film you think is going to be more saleable, and that there just aren't enough golden age detective fan fictions in the audience to please, then you are making the right move. But like I say, how great we get to have let's face it, what we should be doing, of course, is doing a fan supercut, which I'm sure is out there somewhere, where basically
there are some on YouTube.
You just reinsert this. There's no reason not to have it. All of a sudden, you've got a film that lasts an extra 15 minutes or something, but you just shove that stuff back in, and that's great. For the home movie version to last 2.25 hours instead of an hour and 54 minutes, that is just great. So absolutely.
Well, some of that extra time.
Go on.
Well, I was just going to say, some of that extra time I'd cut by getting rid of the song.
I was about to say that fucking sing-song moment. I hate the fucking song.
It's like 40 seconds. Come on, guys.
The whole scene, I would cut the whole
can't stand
thing. I just that trip to Eddie Mars's, everything about that. He walks in and when he's flirting with the waitresses, like that's all fine. But then when he's just standing there watching her sing her little stupid doodah song while she's eyeing up the waitress's legs, and he's like, "Yeah, nice pair of gams, huh?" Like for
me, Sergio, That's where the film comes to a crashing halt.
Me too. I'd rather watch, too many.
I guess
dicks
I'm
on
more
the
of a
dance
leg man
floor.
than you two. What can I say?
Look, I don't mind the waitresses. It's all about just the Bacall just do it. Like, just oh god, like get to her in the bar and or at the gambling table, and cut to him talking to Eddie and then being like, oh, this is whatever, Mrs. Sternwood. Her name isn't Sternwood, is it? In this, it's whatever stupid name they changed it to because she couldn't be divorced.
Rutledge.
Yes. But I that's right. But that was a side tangent. It's a tangent. The best thing that between the two cuts is that they changed is the veil scene. The veil scene in the 45 cut is bad, and it is definitely replaced by a far more superior scene.
Yeah,
more dynamic scene of the two, Bogart and Bacall, in that kind of dingy bar place, and she's wearing that incredibly stunning jacket that feels like is heavy inspiration for Rachel in Blade Runner, and just that scene is fantastic. The innuendo is great. It's a very sexy, spicy scene that I'm like, this is fine. This is good. We don't need Bacall at the mansion when he brings Carmen home, but this is where we need her. That to me is like where it's like, okay, these reshoots make sense. This is a much better, but it's also weird to me that they wouldn't reshoot the scene where they have the really terrible dubbing, but then they would do this whole thing. Like, did they just not have Marlowe's office set anymore? I don't know. But I love this. I love the replacement scene. I think the veil scene is clunky, and the veil is goofy, and her acting is not very good in that scene.
No, this is.
Yeah, like if that's what her agent was worried about, I think he's probably worried about that particular scene the most because he's talking about it the most in his letters, his letters to Jack Warner. He's like, that fucking veil scene, man, that fucking veil scene.
Yeah,
it's gotta go.
And I think he was right. I think he was right. To have concerns about this scene because this is when she's at her most wooden for me. And when you compare the dialogue in the two versions, when she's saying the same words, like my father told me to give you a check or whatever it is.
Yeah.
The way that she delivers those lines they are poles apart from each other, and in a good way. They were right to redo this. It's a much better scene. It's a much livelier scene. It's got much more sass and fizzle. And if anyone thinks that the dialogue is just a bit too Chandler and too Hollywoody, then I'd say watch the Vickers cut and just see how more realistic and down to earth dialogue can be deadly dull. Because I think it's really, really dull.
Yeah,
by comparison.
And I think you can also see that in the following bit where we're post the her big win at Eddie Mars's bar or gambling joint when they tried to rob her, and the new line is, well, I'm glad I asked you to take me home. Her whole demeanor, you can see an ease in her performance. And that, Sergio, I think you mentioned that earlier. It's been a whole year. They know each other better as people, as actors, and I think that is a particular scene where if you compare those two scenes similar to the veil scene, you can see that she has, she's doing a better job in this. So it's like, on one level, it's like, I get why her agent was so adamant, and wanting to get these, doing some serious reshoots with this to help her performance, because I think generally it does, but
I mean, okay, I mean, partly one's a fashion faux pas. Nobody likes the veil. It's interesting, they obviously thought it was a good idea, and I don't think anybody else does. I think the other is, it's back to this idea of what's the scene meant to communicate, and what's it there for. And if you're not supposed to really trust her and you're not 100% meant to really like her in that at that moment, because you feel like she's not being entirely sincere, and obviously she's withholding.
Yep.
And but you cover it up in the replacement scene. It's handled in a completely different way, and with a completely different approach, where that aspect of it becomes a bit less important because it's a more heightened bit of banter. You moved it up a notch, but you've taken it even further out of reality. It's actually more theatrical, but very entertainingly so. So, as I say, it's got to work on its own terms. So I agree with you both. Really, I think it's good that they replaced it. I don't have the issues with the dubbing that you do, Luke. I think when I first saw it, I don't think it stood out to me. Obviously, now you watch it and you know that they've had to redub a couple of lines.
Yeah.
I think, given the way technology was at the time, I think they actually do a pretty good job. I really do. And it was actually uncommon for them to do that kind of thing. But obviously, it saved them a lot of money because they just had to do a minor dub. But it also meant they could keep the whole thing. They didn't need a whole crew to just shoot that extra scene. That's real money. And for them, it was a bit marginal because it's a continuity problem. You're not changing anything else other than making up for the fact that because you've made other changes, you now have to substitute some of the dialogue. And so that's why never bugged me that much. It really
doesn't
didn't
bug me, really.
Mind you, first time I saw the film, of course, the film was entirely dubbed in Italian, so I literally couldn't tell the difference.
Fair enough. Then of course we get the next scene that is, well, there's the good scene that is again injected in the 46 version, and that is the scene of Carmen in Marlowe's flat, which again it seems like was probably filmed when they did the filming originally. So why that wasn't in the 45 version and then suddenly ended up in the 46, I don't know, but it's definitely a scene that needs to be in there. And I'm glad that it's a shame it's not in the Vickers cut, as we're calling it, given that we're calling it the Vickers cut. But I'm glad that it's out there somewhere, because again, the fans who want to do the super cut, like, that scene has to stay. So I like that that's there. We've already talked about the next one, and that is the bit with Bernie and Marlowe. They basically just refilm bits of that scene where they shoehorn in some of that dialogue that he has with the that he has in the DA's office. I guess then we get to the sort of the last big one, and that is the scene with Mrs. Mars, and again they wipe out a whole actor. They wipe out a whole actor for this. Mrs. Mars was played by Pat Clark, and for the 46 version, she was replaced with another actress named Peggy Nunsden, who weirdly looks really damn similar to Bacall, and I don't understand why they picked someone who looks exactly like Bacall to be opposite Bacall in the scene that is predominantly this woman and Bacall. But
it's weird, isn't it? It's a strange choice.
I have to say, I prefer there are more dynamic shots of Bacall in the other one. I even think the Bogart is giving a slightly better performance in the 46 version, particularly when he's waking up from his being knocked out. But I think Peggy Clark, who plays Mrs. Mars in the 45 version, does a better job.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I like her more. I think she's visually more dynamic. When you say, oh, he's run away with a blonde, she nails that stereotype to a T.
Yeah.
Even though that's not really what happened, but when you look at her, you're like, yeah, she's gorgeous, but she has a strong performance, and when Bogart is goading her and she gets mad and she throws the drink in his water in his face, it just felt more real to me than when it happens the second time.
Me too. And I think it's a shame that they didn't bring her back, whether she wasn't able to come back or what.
Do you know why, Sergio? Because I do not know.
As I understand it, she just wasn't around for filming. She was busy doing something else.
Right.
By the way, you rather amusingly conjoined the two actresses together. So it's Pat Clark and Peggy Knudsen.
Did I say Peggy Clark?
Yes, which I thought I rather like this idea that in the kind of fan edit, we would sort of through AI merge them into a third version.
There's a reason why I think it's a shame she didn't come back, and that is because I agree with Luke 100% that her performance is better, and the throwing of the glass of water is better done. But Bogart is better in the 46. I agree with that as well.
Yeah, I
the
agree.
anger in his voice and his eyes when he's saying about what he thinks Eddie Mars is far superior in the 46 version. And it's a shame we've not got those two great performances butting heads in the climax of this film for me. So if somebody does it, if somebody does a super fan edit, if we could somehow sort of shoehorn her back in, I think we'd have a really great climactic confrontation.
We would have to call it the Peggy Knudsen cut, I think, at that point. Absolutely. You know what it is as well?
Peggy Clark.
The Peggy Clark. There we go. Now you've done it, Sergio.
We've got the Peggy Knudsen version.
Oh, sorry. Yes, of course, the combined version. Yes, sorry. I think, what's interesting, and I don't know if this is the reason, because I agree with what you're both saying completely, is I do wonder if the way that Bogart is playing it in this slightly more, let's call it relaxed manner, is precisely because by this point the kind of slight shift in tone means that you're kind of leaning into a version of the story that has a bit less jeopardy. By it's pretty subtle, so it could just be that's how he felt that day after all. But you get the impression that because they know how they did it the first time and they've got it there on film and they can literally look at it on the set, and they were probably doing that a little bit to match cuts and things, see if they can reuse anything. Although I think they just reshot the whole thing.
Yeah, they did.
But it seems to me that it takes away the danger element, so it becomes more about the banter and about them. And therefore, by diffusing that, it means that it's a softer scene for Bogart and Bacall. And that's what that really means. They're just leaning ever so slightly, ever more gently into that part of the overall, approach to the material. And so I think that one of the reasons why I don't think she's particularly good actor in this role. I think Knudsen isn't particularly memorable. As you say, she looks overly made up. She looks weirdly like Bacall. I think, unfortunately, what it probably tells you is that director Howard Hawks had a bit of a type. I'll say no more. But I think that tended to happen. I believe Bacall looked quite a lot like his actual wife. And Slim in But Have Not. Well, Slim was the nickname for his wife. So I think there's that. Whereas obviously, Pat Clark looks very differently, and so I think it works better. So it's very interesting. But I think that's the only rationale I can give. Is that you're just slightly modulating it. But yeah, maybe they're in a hurry.
I mean,
and they use that as the take they used, and he didn't want to keep getting smashed in the face with water. It says, hey, I did this 365 days ago. Stop throwing water at me. Or whatever. But there you go.
I think his performance in the 46 version is more intense in this scene.
I agree with that. Yeah, I don't think it's softened. I think he's harsher in the 46.
I think he's harsher. Yeah, I think he's a bit laconic in the Vickers cut, but in the 46 one, it's especially the lines when he's saying, I think Eddie Mars is a killer by remote control and a blackmailer and a...
to her, yes. I just mean when he's talking to Bacall.
No, when he's talking to Pat Clark.
Sorry. No, you're right. Sorry, I should have... you're absolutely right. I should have been clearer. In a way, it makes the oddity of it more stark. But that's my point is that when he's doing the stuff that reflects back on the Bacall, and it's the them scene aspect of it, it's kind of like you've shifted tonally, you've buttressed that, and so it kind of has it jars a bit more, I think.
Because when he's talking when he's talking to Mrs. Mars, if we could have Pat Clark in that scene from the 46 version, he's better and she's better than Peggy Knudsen.
Yeah, he's pushing harder, isn't he? Yeah.
He's pushing harder, he's pushing harder.
Maybe he's having to, because I think Knudsen's actually
not really
she's just not there for him.
No.
Yeah.
Not to be unkind.
But I do take your point, Sergio, that then when it becomes them two again, it goes back to banter and he's lost that edge a little bit,
Back to Bogart and Bacall.
Now we're back to Bogart and Bacall vehicle, whereas before he's been Marlowe, you know what I mean? And it is a shame.
Yes. What else should we chip at here? I think we've sort of come to the end of the big changes between the big differences between the two. What hanging chads do we have left?
If I'm honest, I don't know about you, Matt. I can't think of anything even remotely important. I will tell you one thing, though. When I was rewatching it, I was struck again by how studio bound the whole film is, especially when you compare it with Murder My Sweet, and how even big exterior sets are shot inside the studio. Like the outside of the Geiger house, let's call it that, and, so you've got to build a whole sort of cottage with a street to go up to it, and I was looking at it very carefully, and this is apart from a couple of stock shots and obviously stuff that's used for back projection, I could really only count one genuine scene that was shot on location, which is when he goes to the kind of the garage area to where Mrs. Mars is, and he sort of pushes the car into the side ditch so that it can look like he's blown a tire, right? That's a second unit shot done on location, but everything else, it's all in the studio and very occasionally on the back lot for some of the street scenes. But even some of those street scenes are done in the studio. And it's fascinating. And in that sense, it gives it this weirdly hermetic feel. By comparison, Murder My Sweet feels much more open air, if you like. He actually goes out and about. A lot of it's more in daytime. I don't think they traveled very far to shoot, and obviously and there's all the stuff on the beach house, that's all done in the studio. Okay. But, other scenes, it's very interesting. It's just a choice that they made, one they didn't have to make. I'm not sure why. I guess it was just a preference, a bit like Hitchcock preferring to shoot indoors, maybe. But it's very interesting. It's such a controlled film from that point of view. It was very interesting to literally, I was literally looking, I think, okay, is there no, that's the back lot. They still haven't left. Oh, that's in the open air somewhere. That's it. Second unit shot. And there's another one on a street scene like that, and it's second unit. Nothing with the actors. It's just so interesting. They never left the studio. Fascinating. Just the way they used to do it.
The way they used to do it, yeah. And it's a very slick film. The 46 is a very slick piece of work. And the 45, because to a large extent, it's the same thing. Just with these bits sort of played around with. But the overall quality of filmmaking is very, very good, I think.
Yeah. Although
I don't, but I still prefer Murder My Sweet. I still think The Big Sleep comes sort of quite.
It's not noirish enough. The 45 I prefer if I want some noir, because it's more noir, but it's still not really a very noir kind of film. Not compared with Murder My Sweet, that's for sure. In terms of the lighting, it practically never is. I mean, the scene when they knock off Elisha Cook Jr., and isn't he great in it? It's fantastic scene after Marlowe's been roughed up. And he's actually a completely straight guy. And all the scenes with Agnes, Agnes is great. I mean, I was going to say was, you've got this long list
Oh yeah.
of terrific young women, all of whom basically give Marlowe the eye. I mean, he's supposed to be 38. He's actually 45 when he's filming it, mostly. And you've got the librarian, goes to the Hollywood Library, and she gives him a quick kind of like, you don't look like the kind of guy you would take out this kind of book.
Yeah.
That's someone called Carol Douglas. Then you've got Sonia Darren as Agnes, who doesn't get a credit apparently because her agent got into a spat with Jack L. Warner. She's got a big role, and she's not credited just because they had a tiff.
Well, there you go.
Dorothy Malone, of course.
Dorothy Malone, yeah.
Her first probably standout role, and she's fabulous.
Brilliant.
You got an actress called Lorraine Miller, who's the Hatchet Girl. Again, she's got hello, Humphrey, and then Joy Barlow as the taxi driver. I want to see a whole movie just about her. She's great.
Yes.
I love her.
She's great.
I wish, I want Uber drivers like that. I really do. Preferably in black and white in 1945. But
we just don't seem to get them, though, do we?
No, we really don't.
No.
But but she's marvelous, and it kept reminding me of, and this is where the Charlie Feldman, apologies, with Charlie Feldman, who of course produced Casino Royale eventually, and so did a mock Bond. But it kept reminding me, that aspect of the film, it kept reminding me of what it was like with Daniel Craig in Casino Royale, where for the first time in a very long time, we had a number of scenes where credibly, it seemed to me, that the girls were eyeing him up and being pleased by what they saw, and he could sort of get them to do things for him just because he's a hunky, guy. I think it had been quite a bit since we've seen a Bond, probably not really since Lazenby. Maybe, I think Lazenby and Connery probably, genuinely catnip to the ladies. I think we had slightly older actors by the time that the other actors came in. I don't mean to be, mean or bizarre about anybody. Brosnan's great as well, but they didn't play it that way, really.
No.
But in that one, they kind of did, because it's supposed to be Bond at the beginning. So part of that is being young, youthful, attractive, sexy to all the ladies, and so on and so forth. But he makes mistakes because he's young and a bit dumb. And it was just so funny. I was watching that. You keep thinking, yeah, Howard Hawks probably would have been a good James Bond director in lots of ways. It would have been weird, but it was just weird. It just struck me because of that. Feel free to edit this out of the podcast.
No. It's all staying. It's all staying. Well, there's a playfulness. There's a playfulness to the 46 version that I think you can see in in what comes of the Bond films, of the Connery films. There's I think I can see why you might consider Hawks as a director for a Connery Bond.
Yeah, well, there is definitely, I'd go so far as to say a more Bond as well, because there is definitely in the bookshop, that, well, he's not gonna come out for another 3 hours, well, how should we kill that time? And she puts the close sign on. I mean, that's like Roger Moore saying, how do you kill 3 hours in Rio if you don't samba? As he undresses the maid.
Oh my God, Moonraker reference. Did you have to, Matt? Did you have to?
It was the best one to illustrate my point. There are occasions like that in The Big Sleep, of that sort of, shutting up shop early.
Yeah, but it definitely de-noirs it.
It definitely de-noirs it. You don't get Dick Powell doing that, do you?
No, you do not. And of course he could have, but in actual fact, it's interesting how they really kind of don't. It's interesting. The dynamic is very different. You've got a pure romance and you've got a dangerous one, and there's one that he sort of believes in and one he really doesn't, but he plays along. And I think that's handled very nicely. Again, it would have been marvelous to have Bogart to do other Marlowe films where he's just doing Marlowe. I mean, God, what would we give to see his version of The High Window?
Yeah.
But I mean, I quite like The Brash of Doubloon for what it is, but it would have been great if it'd been done as a kind of big studio production.
Yeah.
And anyway, if.
Now, one last thing I wanted to say is we spoke about this on Murder My Sweet, and that is Dick Powell is my favorite Marlowe.
Mine too.
And as fun as The Big Sleep is, I'm not sure I see a big difference between Spade and Marlowe, played by Bogart here. There's some differences, a little. There's a lighterness to his Marlowe a little bit, than to his Spade, maybe. But the shade isn't that, noticeable, I don't think. And so I think this is also part of the overall sort of, I think, the last time we did The Big Sleep, I don't think I gave it 5 Falcons. I'm pretty sure I gave it 4. Probably should have checked. But who cares?
I think we both did, actually. I think we both
2
did.
years ago. I think we did. I think we did. But, but I also sometimes wonder how would this film have been if it wasn't a Bogart film? If this was Dick Powell comes back as Marlowe, would it have been more a Marlowe movie, as we were saying, starring Dick Powell, and then ended up being maybe one of the, would it still have been as iconic, or would it have been forgotten?
Oh, I think it would have been great if Powell had returned, full stop. But I think it would have been really great if he'd returned with Dimitri and they'd done a genuine sequel to Murder My Sweet of one of the other novels, maybe even this one. Because would it have been as iconic? I don't know, because Murder My Sweet's not as... People talk about The Big Sleep before they talk about Murder My Sweet, wrongly in my view. And I wonder whether it would have not had the impact it's had if it wasn't Bogart, Bacall, and Hawks. But for my money, I would still, as I've said before, I'd rather it was Powell, Chandler, and Marlowe. That's my... I would have really loved a Dick Powell Marlowe sequel. I think it would have been absolutely superb, especially to give him another shot of it. Now he's test-driven it so well.
Yeah,
I think it would have been really good to see what he did as a follow-up.
I don't
know whether it would have been as iconic.
Yeah, I mean, all the novels were tied up elsewhere. So if they'd been at RKO, they couldn't have done it. They would have to have done it at a different studio instead of another actor. It would have had, instead of Robert Montgomery, doing Lady in the Lake or so on. I don't agree with you about the way he's playing Maltese Falcon compared with Big Sleep. I think there is a difference. I think in Maltese Falcon, I think he's, having rewatched it fairly recently, my estimation of it really, and this is a film I admire tremendously, but my estimation of it actually went up a bit. I just really found it really impressive. He's a genuinely hard, complicated character and a bit unreadable, a bit inscrutable, but also I think is genuinely a different kind of character. And I think that the way he's playing Marlowe is the difference, I suppose, is that in the end, what we get, it's the kind of the movie star version of the book. Everybody's playing to their strengths, and the relationship between him and Bacall is genuine. It's not some kind of manufactured thing. They have a real on-screen chemistry, to use that well-worn phrase, and they do it very, very well. And it comes across. I don't think Dick Powell will be as good with Bacall, for instance. He has a completely different dynamic with his leading ladies. And it's very interesting. It serves Marlowe better because Marlowe isn't particularly convincing as a romantic lead in that sense. And I think Powell does that better than Bogart does, weirdly. But Bogart here is playing a kind of the big movie star version of the film. And I think that they all come across very well. And I think you're getting, as it were, full Bogart. He's not as good as he is in Casablanca. It's not as good as Roll. No, not the way it's written, because it's messy, because some bits don't entirely make sense. and just because of changes that they've had to make for whatever reason. I think it totally works, but it's a kind of fantasy land idea of what a private eye is. Whereas I totally believe Sam Spade is a realistic depiction of a private eye in 1930s San Francisco. I totally buy that in a way that here I don't. So I really like The Big Sleep. I think it's great fun. I really enjoy it as a star vehicle, which is what it is. And as a really superior star vehicle for both of them, and a great supporting cast, I think it's great. So my feeling is that, and like I say, let's not forget just how good Vickers is. She's sensational in it. It's a shame that they couldn't be honest about how the story should have gone for the ending. But it would have torn the family apart. It would have been horrible. You couldn't have the romantic ending. And yeah, the ending of The Big Sleep, you get the impression I don't think they knew how to end it, but it just sort of stops.
It does.
And you accept them as a romantic couple, but it hasn't exactly been a struggle to get there for them as a romantic couple. And it behaves as if it were. And in a way, oddly enough, in some respects, it sort of betrays the fact that it's beholden to have and have not, which is much more of a wartime story. And obviously this was shot in wartime, but nonetheless. But I think there's slight uncertainty about the future, if you like. It's not a romantic uncertainty, it's just the times. And so you get this slightly odd, it's just, I don't know, kind of ending, which is fine. But it's unexpected in a film like this. And I think it's just, I mean, let's face it, in Murder My Sweet, it ends in a clinch. It's the cliched ending. It's just interesting because it's a funnier scene and it's more amusing, and and it's about kissing the guy sort of thing. It's a funny scene, and so it lets you off the hook because it's actually been pretty intense. Here, you don't really think either of them's ever in any really serious jeopardy because it isn't a particularly hard-boiled film. No. And that's fine. It's a different kind of movie. I think all three of us prefer the other kind of movie, and as such, therefore, I suspect that we might vote the Vickers cut a little more highly. But it's got lots of great things, and Vickers is utterly sensational in it. So, yay.
Yeah, I agree with all that, and I agree with what you say, Sergio, about The Big Sleep being like a big Hollywood machine, like a glitz and glamour type version of what this story is, and that is part of the reason why I prefer Murder My Sweet, which is a lot rougher around the edges. I don't think the Vickers cut makes not an improvement as such, but I don't think it is better than the 46 version. But in many ways, I prefer it for that reason, because it has that feeling of being a little bit rough around the edges, and certainly more noir. So I don't know. It's a difficult one. It's like we said about the Maltese Falcon 31 version, Luke. If you could somehow splice these two films together, you might have a perfect version of it. Or as close as you could get for the time. So I think they sort of complement each other rather than one is better than the other. I think it's a fair assessment. I mean, it's also worth noting, and I we did mention this in our very first go around on this film, and that is Chandler really liked Martha Vickers. He thought she was fantastic in the role, and thought that she outshone Bacall. And I think even in the 46 version, the Vickers scenes when she is on camera, she explodes in a way that I think Bacall doesn't, even though Bacall has good chemistry with Bogart. I think because Bogart and Bacall are playing Bogart and Bacall, and they're not playing, it's not necessarily Marlowe and Vivian, whereas Vickers is playing Carmen Sternwood. She is playing that character, and she's going the distance with that character. And you feel it when she's in these. You feel her unhingedness. You feel her chaoticness. You feel the danger of who she is.
I mean, that scene when she walks in with the gun with Brody, and she's like, "Give me my picture." Like I think that's a great scene. I think every scene of hers, and again, like I'm glad that they reinserted the scene of her in Marlowe's apartment, because she just feels dangerous the whole time, and in a way that, yes, they tried to hint at Bacall, at Vivian being maybe a bad guy, but they never really committed to it. Where I think with Vickers, there was 100% commitment to who her character was, but it is just a shame that they wouldn't take the novel to the story of the novel to its natural conclusion, and they kind of went the way that they did. But I think within both cuts, even though the 54 version doesn't have that scene in Marlowe's flat, I think it shines a light even more on the fact that she could have been second billed. Was that a step too far? I don't think so.
Well, it would be odd, wouldn't it? It would, I think in Murder My Sweet, Claire Trevor gets second billing, and I think that's fair. But even though she's, the baddie, let's put it that way. In this one, she's not in it enough. So she wouldn't get it. But also, she has, in a way, she's playing the bad girl. It's like when people talk about playing villains. If you're not going to be the lead actor, then you want to be the villain. It's more fun than being the best friend. Equally here, she gets to play the bad sister, and Bacall is stuck because she's not a glamour puss, although she looks fantastic. But she's not that kind. It's not Lana Turner. She's not that kind of actor. And therefore, I think that she doesn't have the opportunity. She can't play the way the scenes Vickers does because she can't let rip ever. It's not part of the character as written here, and therefore the opportunity doesn't arise. And so in the end, you're stuck between playing, the kind of a slightly less traditional leading lady, because there's more banter, there's more sexiness, there's a teensy-weensy bit of uncertainty about what she does and doesn't know, and who she is and isn't protecting. But it would not have been possible within the strictures of making this kind of film at that time in this way for her to be anything other than the romantic co-lead of the film.
Yeah.
And as the romantic co-lead of the film, she can't be a villain. She can't be naughty. She can't smack people around. She can't, so therefore, the lovely Martha Vickers, gets to do all the fun stuff, and she's great. Yeah. So she's great. So no disagreement. But is she? Let's put it this way: if she were playing the Bacall role and Bacall were playing her role, Bacall would be the one killing it. It's just the role.
I'm not sure.
I think Vickers is great. I think Bacall's a decent actor, and I think, but she got to play some slightly bizarro characters. Again, young man with a horn. If you ever get to see that, she plays a highly unhinged character in that.
I'm not sure she could do the childish side of Carmen.
She probably can't do the thumb sucking in the way that Martha Vickers can. I give her 100% props on that whole. I think she wins the thumb sucking Olympics. No question about it. But
thumb sucking Olympics.
On that note, a bit of topical in there for you.
There's a banner for the episode.
It's topical at this moment of recording. It won't be topical when this episode comes out.
Who gets gold, silver, and bronze in the thumb sucking Olympics?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, on that note, I guess we can wrap this 2-year anniversary birthday celebration up. This revisit of The Big Sleep, but looking at the Vickers cut, the pre-release version. I guess we'll rate it, because why not? Why not? As everyone knows, we rate all of our films out of 5 Falcons, 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. Sergio, as the guest cinematic sleuth this week, how many Falcons would you give the pre-release version of The Big Sleep?
I'll give it 4, and it's the same 4 that I would give to the standard release version for different reasons. I know I prefer one to the other, but they're both really solid 4s
Mm.
for
Yeah.
me.
That works.
Yeah.
That works.
Yeah, judging this on its own merits, it's a 4. Judging it as a comparison with the 46, I still think it's a 4. I would quite happily watch either of these, depending on which version I wanted to sit through. I don't think this is necessarily a case of one being better than the other, as I've said, but they're both solid 4s.
Yeah. Same. All of this to, basically say yes, both versions are for Falcons, but for very different reasons. And I think it's fun. This is different. This is different in a way that is like different to things, even like the different iterations or the different cuts of like Blade Runner. This is a very unique beast of 2 different versions of the same film that are both fascinating and both good and both have their positives and both have their negatives. Yeah. And you can watch one, Serge, as you were saying, you want your noir version, you watch the pre-release version. You want your Hollywood Flash version, you watch the 46 version, and it's you're winning either way. I don't think either version that you put on is going to disappoint. I don't think one is far more superior than the other, which some people like to say. Hence we're all giving it 4 Falcons as we would the original version, because they both have their strengths and their weaknesses.
I think that's perfectly fair summary. I think that's a perfectly fair summary. I have nothing to add.
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Well, Sergio, thanks again for coming back on our little podcast. Always good to have you on.
Thank you so much for inviting me on this very special occasion. You guys are doing a tremendous job. I look forward to being invited back for your 10th.
There we go.
Should I live that long?
Same for us.
Same for me.
Sergio, where can people find you on the interwebs should they like to do so?
They can simply Google Tipping My Fedora, and they will find me on YouTube. They will find me on WordPress blog of the same title, and they will find me on Blue Sky. They will 100% never find me on X. So yeah, you can just look for me around that way. Otherwise, you might find me on a few Blu-ray and DVD extras around this universe.
There we go. Go find Sergio. Go listen to Tipping My Fedora. Never a dull moment. Never a dull moment. But we will be back next time with another case. So in the meantime, make sure to take care walking down those mean streets.